Okay, this is problem number 19 in the word problems on section 5.13. And this is a batter hit a baseball upward with an initial speed of 120 feet per second. That's his speed. So that's going to be our rate. If you remember on these problems, we had to look up in the directions, and they gave us one equation if we were working in meters and one if we were working in feet. So we're going to use the one where we're working in feet. H equal RT minus 16t squared. Okay. And so I already know my rate is 120, so I'll put that in front of my t minus 16t squared. Okay. Now it says, how much later did the catcher catch it? Well, if you throw it up in the air, and then it comes down and the catcher catches it, the only way we can figure out to do this is to say, we'll call this 0 here, okay? So we're going to move this parabola, we're going to put it down on the x-axis. I know he might have been holding his hand up in the air, and the height might have been something other than 0. He probably didn't catch it on the ground. But in these problems, that's how we have to work this unless we want to tweak them, and they didn't give us enough information to tweak them. So they want to know when did it hit the ground. So that means that's 0, okay? The height would be 0. And all we got to do, this one's an easier one than number 17, which we looked at in class. This one is 120t minus t squared. So how much later did the catcher catch it? We want to know the time. Well, if you look at this, we could factor this pretty easily. I could move the terms around, but I also could pull out a GCF. Let's see. If I look at this, there's a GCF, I believe, of 8 in here. I think 8 divides in both of those numbers in t. If I do 120 divided by 8, that makes it 15, and I took my t out. And then 16t squared, if I write down my subtraction sign, I can think 16 divided by 8 is 2, and t squared, take out the t, is t. So I have these two factors, and they're already equal to 0 because we decided we were going to just say where he hit the ground, we're going to call that 0. And I know that seems a little hokey, but that's what we do in these problems. All right, so I take the 8t, that's one factor, and I set it equal to 0. And then I take the 15 minus 2t, which is another factor, and I set it equal to 0. Now, 8 times t is 0. We know that that's got to be 0. We could divide the 8 out and get, oh, t is 0, okay? Now here, I need to add 2t to both sides. To solve, I'd have 15 is equal to 2t. I could have moved the 15 and divided by negative, but I like to move things from side to side that are negative and make them positive that way. So that's why I chose to do it this way. Now my t, if I want to solve for it, I need to divide both sides by 2. T equals 7.5. Which problem makes sense? All right, at t equals 0, that's when he's just throwing it up in the air. That's not when the catcher's going to catch it at the moment that he throws it. So we're going to throw that answer out. But it makes sense. The 7.5 makes sense. The guy's going to throw it. It's going to have a little bit of an arc to it, maybe not that high. He's probably didn't throw it way up high in the air, but he's probably, at least going to have a small arc to it. So we're just kind of exaggerating it when we draw these. Probably in 7.5 seconds, and actually that's our answer, 7.5 seconds. Okay, so for number 24, it says a garden plot 4 meters by 12 meters, and I've marked that on the garden plot, which in the book is green, and you can't see the color on here. Has one side along a fence like this. The area of the garden is to be doubled, so whatever my initial area is, I'm going to double the area. The area of the garden is to be doubled by digging a border of uniform width. That means if it's x here, it's going to be x here, and it's going to be x here. Okay, so all these, everywhere, whether it could, you could measure it, it's going to be x. The area is doubled by digging a border of uniform width on the other 3 sides. What should the width of the border be? Okay, now I know the initial area of the garden because they told me it was 4 meters by 12 meters, and it's length times width. 4 times 12 would give me 48 meters. If I'm going to double that, that means I'm going to multiply 48 times 2. My new area is going to be 96 meters squared. So if I'm thinking area is length times width, my new area of my new garden is going to be 96. Now how could I describe the length and the width? Now here's the deal. I'll use a different color. Let's consider that this is the length here. I could draw it down here, but I'm going to draw it up here so that you can see it was initially 12, and then I had an x on this side and an x on this side. So my whole length here would actually be x plus 12 plus x, which is really 2x plus 12. So for my length, I'm going to call that 2x plus 12. Now my width normally would have been 4, right? But they put a border. Now remember, the border's only going to be on this lower side here, where I'm kind of darkening it. So it was 4, but we added x to it. So I could put 4 plus x, but I'm just going to write it as x plus 4 just so it looks nicer to my brain. So what I got to do is I got to solve this. In order to solve it, I need to have a 0 on one side. So I know I need to move the 96 to the other side, but before I do, let me go ahead and multiply this all out. That's 2x squared plus 8x plus 12x plus 48. Okay, let me go ahead and simplify the right-hand side first. That's 2x squared plus 20x plus 48. Okay, now let me move the 96 over here. I'm subtracting it from both sides. 0 is 2x squared plus 20x, and then that'd be a minus 48, wouldn't it? Okay, so I got to factor this. And remember, I got to go factor it. It's already set equal to 0. If I pull the GCF out, it'll make this a much easier problem. So if I divide the 2 out, 2x squared divided by 2 is x squared. 20x divided by 2 would be 10x. 48 divided by 2 would be 24, and it's a negative. So when I'm trying to solve this, I'm thinking, okay, I'm trying to multiply to get negative 24, and I'm trying to add to get that 10 in the middle. What would work? Well, I know 6 times 4 is 24, and when I add them, I get 10, but I need, let's see, this may not be what I want, because how am I going to get a negative 24? If I make one of these negative, I'm not going to get the 10. So you might think those work, but then you go, okay, maybe not. How about 12 and 2? 12 times 2 is 24, and there's a difference of 2 between them. So what if I did this? What if I made it 12 minus 2? 12 times negative 2 is negative 24. 12 plus negative 2 is 10. Those numbers would actually work. So sometimes it's not the first thing you think of, even though you think it should work. You got to kind of check again. This is x plus 12 and x minus 2. Okay? So if I want to solve this, I take each factor. The 2, it doesn't make sense to set 2 equal to 0, so I'm not going to do that. But I can say 0 equal x plus 12 and 0 equal x minus 2. I didn't have to put the parentheses on it. I don't know really why I did over there. I guess I was just looking at the parentheses there. If I solve for x by subtracting 12 from both sides, I get x equal negative 12. That does not make sense. I cannot have a negative width. So I know this is going to be an answer I throw out. Over here, if I solve it, I get x equal 2. Oh, that one makes sense. So it looks like x is equal to 2, but is that the answer? What did they ask us? They ask us, what should the width of the border be? Oh, well, the width was x. So, yeah, that is my answer. Width of the border is x, so the border should be 2 meters, because this was in meters, so it should be 2 meters. And we're done. Okay. For 25, it says Vanessa built a rectangular pen for her dogs. She used an outside wall of the garage for one of the sides of the pens. And they label this X here. And her fence is everything that's not on the wall. She had to buy 20 meters of fencing in order to build the other sides of so she needed 20 meters of fencing. Now, think about that. That's kind of a perimeter, because if you fence around something, isn't that like perimeter? So what they're telling us is kind of the perimeter she bought was 20, but that's not everything, is it? It's just 3 sides. So I could say, well, let's see, it says she had to buy 20 meters of fencing in order to build the other sides. Find the dimensions of the pen if the area is 48 meters squared. Okay, so I know the area is 48 meters squared. And so how could let's think about that area. Let's start there, because we kind of got to start somewhere. We need a length and we need a width for our area. Our area is 48. I don't know what this length should be. They don't really tell me, but there is something I can do here if I think about it. I know the width is x, so they called it x, right? Now, if this is x and this is x, couldn't I say, if you think about it, if she had 20, she used x of it here. Let me use a different color. She used x of it here, so we could take out x from the 20. She used another x here. We could take out another x, and that would be the length that she would have left to use for this green part here that she had to build. So that what we would commonly call our length here would be 20 minus x, which is 20 minus 2x. So her width was x, and we could call her length 20 minus 2x. And we could solve this. So we kind of had to put together the two parts of this. We had to think about, how am I going to describe the length? If the width is x, I don't want to use a different variable because I don't know how to work with more than one variable. So I had to think about that there was 20 meters of the fencing, and then subtract out the parts, the two x parts, and that would leave me with the length. And so that's why I represented the length that way. So what we have is 48 is equal to 20 minus 2x times x. Let me just write it this way. It'll be easier to look at, won't it? Okay, so let's solve this. 48 is equal to x times 20 is 20x, and x times negative 2x is negative 2x squared. Now, I want my x squared term to be positive, and right now it's negative. So let me move these two terms over to the other side. If I do that, I would be subtracting 20x from both sides. I'll just write it here, since I didn't leave myself room. And I'd be adding 2x squared to each side, okay? So if I do that, these two terms show up on the other side. The positive 20x became a minus 20x. The minus 2x squared became a plus 2x squared. And then over on this right-hand side, since I moved everything, they're going to cancel out and give me a 0. So here's my equation that I'm going to solve. Now let me put it in standard form, which means putting it in the right order. We'll put the square term first, and then we'll put the x term, and then we'll put the number. Now I got to solve this, which means I need to factor it. I should always first check for GCF because that makes my life easy, and here there is a GCF, it's 2. So if I take 2 out of 2x squared, I have x squared. If I write down my subtraction sign and say 20 divided by 2, that's 10x. I could also say negative 20 divided by 2 is negative 10x, is the other way you think about it. And then I've got a positive 48 divided by 2, that would be a positive 24. Or I could just write down my plus sign and say 48 divided by 2 is 24. Okay, so now to solve this problem, I've got this smaller piece in here to factor, and it's not so hard. Let's think about this. I'm trying to multiply to get 24 and add to get negative 10. We kind of had in problem 24 something kind of like this, and in this one, if you look at it, wouldn't negative 6 and negative 4 work? Negative 6 times negative 4 is positive 24. Negative 6 plus negative 4 is negative 10. So I could say, oh, this is just x minus 6 and x minus 4. And now, since I factored it, I can set my two factors equal to 0. And I can go either, okay, if I add 6 to each side, x is going to be 6 here. And if I add 4 to each side, x is equal to 4. So my answers are, I could have built it with sides of 4 or sides of 6. Either one would work. If I make it 4, let's see, let's go to another page. We know our area is 48. We know area is length times width. So my two choices were 4 and 6. So let's find the other dimensions. If I choose 4 for my width, and I solve, so if I plug in 4 for that, and I divide the 4 out, my length would be 12. So one option for my pen is to make it a 4 by 12 pen, okay? But remember, there was another answer that actually makes sense in the problem. So if I say, okay, I'm going to make my width 6, then I could divide the 6 out of both sides, and my length would be 8. So it would be, another option is a 6 by 8 pen, okay? So that's where, you've got two choices there.